Society spent a generation avoiding fat. And you're here to tell us that saturated fat is a good thing?
We discovered this group of molecules called odd chain saturated fatty acids have a lot of benefits. And in fact, if you look at the Goldilocks one, the one that is responsible for, all of these benefits, the one we can't make but we need from our diet, it's C15. That in fact, it is the third ever to be discovered and the first essential fatty acid to be discovered in over 90 years. And so if you look at the cell membranes of short-lived animals, they have higher PUFAs, higher omega-3s, less odd-chain saturated fatty acids. If you look at longer-lived animals, they have less PUFAs as a ratio and more odd-chain saturated fatty acids, stronger cells. We need to replace C15. We need to put it back in our diet. My name is Eric Venn-Watson. I'm a military physician. I'm co-founder of a company called Seraphina Therapeutics and our product Fatty15. It is wonderful to be here today on EverForward Radio. I'm really excited to dig in more to the science around C15, help people understand and help people grow and improve their health.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to EverForward Radio. I've got a killer episode for you today. We're going to be unpacking a concept that many of us have probably heard about. Saturated fats are bad for you. There's such thing as good fats, healthy fats, and the role that dolphins play in understanding healthy fats and longevity. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chase. It's wonderful to be here.
I feel like we get in these rotations of science and nutrition. Every decade or so, one thing we were led to believe is good for us, one thing is bad for us, and then it's actually hold up. But this concept of saturated fats actually being good for us really caught my attention. You'll have this tagline of, quote, society spent a generation avoiding fat. And so I understand you're here to tell us that saturated fat is a good thing?
There's some saturated fats that are good and bad, is the summary. But, how did society get to the place where it is now, where we thought all saturated fats are bad, right? If you go back a generation, right, the government came out with guidelines of avoiding saturated fats. And the reason they did that was because men were dying of heart attacks. And they thought at the time it's probably due to higher levels of saturated fat, right? There's much more to that story. But we found, based on studying healthy dolphins, that a saturated fat is not a saturated fat, meaning you can't take one whole group of nutrients away. In fact, there are good saturated fats and there are bad saturated fats. So one more level, those good saturated fats are odd chain saturated fats, whereas the bad ones, the ones that are pro-inflammatory, are the even chain saturated fatty acids.
Okay, so as if it wasn't enough, I'm just imagining people listening going, I got to drink my water, I got to go to sleep, I got to take my supplements, watch my nutrition, I got to get monounsaturated, is it polyunsaturated, saturated, all this kind of dissection of the different types of fats when I'm just trying to move well, be well, sleep well. This is kind of like another layer of another thing I think that I need to keep track of. So can you kind of dissect why this is important to understand the even and odd saturated fat, but explain it to me like I'm a golden doodle, like my brother would say.
Sounds good. So there are some nutrients that are essential. Vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin C. There are 2 essential fatty acids. One's an omega-3, one's an omega-6. Right? These are things that our body needs but can't make. We have to get them from our diet.
And that's what essential means, right?
Exactly. And so we discovered this group of molecules called odd chain saturated fatty acids have a lot of benefits. And in fact, if you look at the Goldilocks one, the one that is responsible for, all of these benefits, the one we can't make but we need from our diet, it's C15. So it is now classified as an essential fatty acid. In fact, it is the third ever to be discovered and the first essential fatty acid to be discovered in over 90 years.
Damn, 90 years.
Yeah.
Which is pretty mind-blowing when you think about it, that that's true, but yet, at least for me, up until discovering you all, I had never heard of C15.
Right.
I had never had even this concept of, a saturated fat is good for me, odd, even. And if this is an essential fat, then why have we not heard about it until now? Yeah. And if it's been a discovery in 90 years?
Long story short, it took dolphins. And why dolphins? It took a model to understand diseases of aging, how we age, aging rates that don't drink. They don't drink coffee. They're not eating different foods. Dolphin model's really interesting because they're in the same environment. They only eat fish. They exercise every day. So it's a model that you can study.
So it's really a great controlled environment.
It's a great controlled environment.
Oh, wow. It's like a study that Mother Nature kind of just
right. One dolphin is not driving a fancy car and the other one walking to work. You get rid of all this white noise and you start to work through like, what are the factors that actually contribute to healthy aging and positive aging rates?
Okay, so you can't just drop dolphins on us and not unpack the story a little bit. Now, you have a really unique background, you and your wife. And how did you all get to the point of discovering this from studying dolphins?
Right. So my wife, Stephanie, started the translational medicine program for the Navy's dolphins. And the reason for that program is because they had dolphins that were living 50% longer than those in the wild. And they get great health care.
Captivity?
This is the Navy population. Okay. So they're free to go. They live in the open ocean. They're free to go. They come back every day because that's where their home is, their pod is. Wow. Yeah. So in San Diego Bay, you'll see them swimming around and things like that. Sometimes they jump into boats and you'll be like, I know what's going on.
Steven, really calm down.
Right. Really a great population.
And these were living twice as long?
Right. And so then they had a geriatric population of dolphins. So the Navy, that's where this population lives, was taking samples. Like we go to the doctor and get labs. Well, they were getting labs on dolphins for over the course of their entire lives. So after 60 years of getting labs, things like that, we were able to go back into those archives and look at labs over time. What factors in dolphins' blood predicted healthy aging and less chronic disease? And so that's the dolphin connection. And remember, they only eat fish. They're not on chronic medications. They exercise every day. So it's interesting because it gives you a cheat sheet to the pathophysiology of chronic diseases, diabetes, Alzheimer's, fatty liver disease, things like that. So really interesting.
Very. What is it about dolphins that caught your attention? I mean, living twice as long is a very unique thing. Is it because they're mammals and we're also mammals? What is the correlation between mammals and humans that actually makes this pertinent to us?
Right. And so if you look at how discovering micronutrients and pharmaceuticals, things like that is usually done, it's in mice, worms, and flies. And that's tough because the way their physiology is for short-lived animals is very different from long-lived animals like us or blue whales or dolphins. And so you want to look at a model that's long-lived, that is in the same environment, eating the same foods, exercising, getting medical care, all that. It's hard to do. There's no human population that does that. I had coffee this morning, and so why dolphins then? It's because they have this population that is all those things, right? It's a big brain, long-lived animal with physiology similar to humans that is in an incredible environment to understand, like why, if you control for everything, do some dolphins or some people get chronic diseases of aging and some don't? And so hence,
the $1 million question.
Right. That's how this discovery was made because, we thought, to make a long story short, some dolphins were getting precursors of diseases, metabolic syndrome, things like that.
Dolphins can get metabolic syndrome?
Right. They get the same diseases that humans get, usually not
the
as
same
severe.
diseases?
Alzheimer's, early stage of Alzheimer's, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, fatty liver disease, all this. Their physiology is very similar to ours.
Is that mammalian-based or is it dolphin-based? Are there other mammals that also get the same diseases as humans?
I assume so. I am not a veterinarian. But yes, the path, understanding like how the glucose metabolism, for instance, is very similar from dolphins to humans. The genes associated with that are very similar from dolphins to humans. So because they're in this clean environment, because they collected data over 60 years, because they have they started electronic medical records before they existed in people, right? And so they have these incredible data stores that you can go back to. And so that's the reason for the dolphins. And to make a long story short, it's a cheat sheet to understanding pathophysiology of disease and then, what small molecules like influence health. So some of the dolphins were getting metabolic syndrome and some weren't. So the group, not I, my wife and the team, started looking through, like trying to answer the question, why? And they thought it was omega-3s because dolphins eat fish. And of course, they're going to have higher levels of omega-3s. But omega-3s were a negative predictor of their health and aging rate, whereas odd-chain saturated fatty acids, specifically C15, was the highest of the predictors of healthy aging. And that's what kicked it off. And then we moved that into a very pharmaceutical type of process. And C15 is currently being moved forward for treatment of different diseases, NAFLD, NASH, liver diseases, anemia, other fibrotic diseases. Yeah.
That kind of answered a question I had in mind, and that was, how do you know that C15 was really the determining factor?
Yeah.
And it kind of sounds like that was it.
It's interesting because at first we didn't. And so the first discussions that Steph had with Ira Plato on NPR Science Friday were about C17, because there was higher levels of C17. But when we started to look into, okay, what is the actual essential micronutrient? It turned out that it wasn't C17, it was C15. And in fact, your body takes C15, adds 2 carbons to it. So when you take C15, you get C17.
Oh, wow.
And that's what we were measuring in the dolphins, was higher levels of C17. So you need C15. It's the essential saturated fat that's good for your health. And you need it to maintain normal levels and maintain your health.
So then, is C15 naturally found in the diets of dolphins, and is it in our diets? Where do we get C15?
Right.
Where do dolphins get C15? How is this in the body, in the bloodstream?
The dolphins were getting it from the skin and heads. And so we don't generally eat skin and heads anymore. Some
Skin and heads of
cultures do.
other fish, of other animals? Okay.
So they were getting fish. And interestingly, part of the reason that the dolphins were getting metabolic syndrome, it turned out, were as the oceans have gotten warmer, and it's harder to get fish that have more fat in them, it was like a deficiency that they were creating in this dolphin population, because the fish had less C15 in it that they were getting fed. And so that was another reason for this discovery. So moving to humans, how do we get it? Usually we get it in full-fat dairy products, full-fat cow's milk, cheese, that kind of thing. However, our grass has changed, our environment has changed. Cows are getting corn-fed instead of grass-fed. And so if you look at C15 levels in our products, milk, cream, that kind of thing, there's just less in there.
And not to mention, so many people now are using milk alternatives. Soy, almond, oat. Yesterday, for the first time, I was at a coffee house, and they offered pistachio milk.
Oh,
that was new to me. Yeah. I guess you can milk anything with nipples.
Yeah, and so to your point, if you drink or eat plant-based, milks, in this case, drink plant-based milk, they're deficient in C15. And so, this is getting to population-wide C15 deficiencies. And so we, as a society, have taken this molecule out of our diets over the past, 40 years, and now there's a deficiency syndrome. And so, long story short, we and other groups have been looking at that and trying to show, is there actually a C15 deficiency syndrome? And is that deficiency syndrome causing disease? And there is a clinical trial that is done and is in review at a major journal that will help answer that question. I can't talk about it too much, but that's the theory. And there's a lot of science showing that there are C15 population-wide deficiencies that are causing unhealthy states in 1 out of every 3 potentially of us, which is a big deal. So we're trying to get C15 back in the world's food supply.
What comes up for me is this constant dilemma I think a lot of people find themselves in, and that's, you make a choice to try to improve an area of your health. You go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time, you modify your diet, just little things that compound, not that long of a period of time, that really do make you feel better, can actually move the needle in a biomarker. But I'm kind of hearing that a choice to improve your health might unfortunately make you deficient in something else that's very essential to your health.
Right. And in my mind, you just can't take away a whole group of nutrients. There's moderation, and there's understanding, that some nutrients in that group will be good for you and some will potentially not be good for you. And it's just getting a better understanding of that. And so that's why the Dolphin model, again, to go back to that, is so incredible, because it gives you the understanding of which of these micronutrients are actually important for healthy aging, right? And so, it's not a one-off discovery. In fact, when we were looking at healthy aging in dolphins, especially Steph and the group, there's a lot of other molecules that they found that look like they influence different,
Like what?
preventing different disease states, different nutritional states, things like that. And so, long story short, if you go back to all these archive data and blood tests, and you then look at those with multiomics, metabolomics, lipidomics, genomics, like really looking into those samples, and then seeing, like, for instance, if a dolphin eats something, like they ate something in this, part of their diet, what happened to those molecules as it goes through their system? What are the metabolites? That gives you great insight into, what molecules actually influence health and why you can't do that and why it hasn't been done to this point. It has been done to this point, but why it hasn't been done on a large scale is just those animal models, people models are hard to find, right? There's so much white noise in that.
Yeah.
And so hence, C15, when we looked at metabolites, when we looked at the metabolome, C15 was at the top of predictors of healthy aging, but the top of 100 other molecules that look like they have benefits, which we're also working up as well. So let me, because we kind of all over the place. So here's what actually happened, right? So the dolphin model provided this insight, right? And then we looked at it, and many, many studies, a decade of research was done. And then we published that science in Nature's scientific reports, with the question, is C15 an essential fatty acid? And that was 2020. Since that time, many, many groups, lots of publications have come out, supporting that data, and those are all on discoverc15.com. And so then we said, okay, it's essential. How does it compare to the other two essential fatty acids?
Right.
And so we had a third party compare them and look at different cell systems, like a lot of different data on that. And so long story short, like C15 it's a better molecule in a lot of ways than omega-3s. It's got more cellular benefits. It's safer for your cells. Omega-3s, polyunsaturated fatty acids, are toxic at higher doses to your cells. So I know we'll probably go into that, but that's what we found out there. So now we knew this is an essential fatty acid. It's better than omega-3s. And when we compared it to omega-3s, it was like pure pharmaceutical grade EPA, the highest bar, right? And so then we're like, okay, let's take a look at let's take a look at more of the metabolites. As you eat C15, what happens? Because if it's essential, there's got to be something amazing in there. And so we discovered one of the metabolites is called PDC, pentadecanoyl carnitine, which turns out to be the second ever fully acting endocannabinoid, like ever. And so meaning it goes CB1, CB2 receptors cross, and has a lot to do with why when you take fatty 15, you feel a lot of like pain reduction, mood, balancing, feel better, that kind of thing.
Now, is this more pertinent now because, at least in my kind of personal knowledge, the endocannabinoid system, we only really have known about this and really been looking into it, the last 10, 15 years-ish?
Right.
So it's kind of like this maybe has always been there, but we didn't really even know that the system to look at it, we didn't even know how to really go about that. We didn't know it existed.
Right. It's fairly new, and then the knowledge, but the knowledge has been expanding, right? So the endocannabinoid system, is not made for cannabis, right? These are natural receptors, and odd chain saturated fatty acids are a big, are probably what the CB1, CB2 endocannabinoid system was actually designed to, use.
Which makes sense when I think about, I take CBD products, and when you look at especially a tincture or even a gel cap, it has to have an emulsifying agent. They always put like a fat oil with it. So it makes perfect sense. It's kind of like this binding agent to go along with it into the endocannabinoid system.
Right. And
Can we get a C15 agent with that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, so we published that in Nature again, scientific reports, and we thought, oh my God, this would be such a big discovery. And it's just complex. It's hard to understand. So when people think about fatty 15, they understand, hey, this is a better alternative than omega-3s, right? But it also activates this endocannabinoid system, but it's harder to understand. And so we came out with that. We thought it would be really big, but then, it wasn't really covered in the news and things like that as much as kind of I thought.
Well, there are other things going on in the news back in 2020.
Yes.
You might have taken a back burner.
Might have taken a back burner.
Still very important.
Yeah. And so we saw that is an essential fatty acid, better than omega-3s, and now we have this incredible like metabolite that has potential implications for a lot of different diseases that we're looking at on the pharmaceutical side as well. And then we said, okay, this molecule is activating longevity pathways, and it's helping dolphins live healthier longer. How does it compare to the leading, healthy aging molecules, rapamycin, metformin, like acarbose? And so we had the same group do testing. So they look at a plethora of cell systems for different diseases. They look at longevity pathways, that kind of thing, and they see, like, how does it compare? And so C15 and rapamycin are actually really similar with regards to activating longevity pathways and improving health in these different cell systems. However, rapamycin's from Easter Island bacteria, right? And so C15 has been in the world's food supply since the beginning of time. And so most likely these longevity pathways are not necessarily for rapamycin. They're probably more for odd-chain saturated fatty acids like C15. And so that was the next study. Published that. It was interesting because we got a lot of interest in the longevity community, and those studies are still going on. And so where we are today, just to bring big groups, we're now looking at the deficiency syndrome in more detail. And so hence the reason for this triple-blinded, clinical trial that we did with, Jeff Schwimmer, who's the leader in fatty liver disease and, pediatric, NAFLD. And so the question has been, are there C15 deficiencies? And it looks like the answer is yes. And are those deficiencies causing different conditions, poorer health? And that's what we're working on now.
I really want to get into some of the deficiencies when we're talking about C15 and what it might look like, feel like in both a qualitative and a quantitative manner by how we feel, our performance, energy, but also looking at key biomarkers.
Yeah.
But first, I've heard you say a couple times, better than omega-3s.
Yeah.
And anybody who has been focusing on their nutrition, looking at diet, or maybe even choosing to go the supplement route, we've heard for many years the importance of omega-3s in the diet. More specifically, the ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s, pro-inflammatory, anti-inflammatory, making sure we're getting our krill oil, fish oil, eating fresh, wild-caught fish. Does this mean are omega-3s out and C15 is in? Yeah. Are they better than omega-3s, or are omega-3s not as good as we thought?
So everyone needs omega-3s. And so most of the omega-3s that we need, we get from our diet, right? And we get from fish and some plants and things like that. You still need those in your diet. So the question is, do we need fish oils, as a supplement? And so if you look at the spectrum of supplements, fish oil supplements, there's, oil supplements that you get from Bond, CVS, things like that. And then there's all the way to pharmaceuticals. One of the problems with the fish oil supplements is they're oils. And so they oxidize. And when they oxidize, they go rancid. And so there's more and more literature coming out suggesting that those oxidized byproducts are probably not great for us. So meaning, our customers ask the same thing all the time. Fatty15, do I need to stop? Can I stop taking my omega-3s?
Yeah, I've thought the same thing.
The answer that we say, if your physician is prescribing you, like Vascepa, like a pure EPA to treat lipidemia, like a triglyceridemia or, part of your lipid panel, then yes, keep taking that. And those are in oxidized resistant packaging. They're pure. I mean, that is a very different world than omega-3 fish oil. So when customers say, can I take it instead of fish oil? We say yes, because there's all these problems with oils in general and fish oils. So meaning, if you are going to use fish oils, you want to make sure it's a very high quality. And if you're smelling the bottle, if you're smelling any fishy.
If it smells fishy, that's bad.
Probably bad.
Yeah.
Probably bad. And so if you're getting a lot in your diet, you're probably good. However, if you're vegan and you're not getting the diet, so for those people, you might need a omega-3 fish oil supplement or krill oil supplement. Just make sure it's very high quality and that's not oxidized and things like that. There's a few articles that come out recently, a lot of them, looking at what's on the shelf as far as omega-3 supplements, right? And so in one study, I think this was The Guardian, they looked at, of the 10 products, for every 10 products that they looked at and tested on the shelves, one was already rancid.
No.
And then 50% of them had levels higher than oxidation.
Rancid meaning what actually, not only is it just lower in purity and potency, it's actually going to do harm?
Well,
Potentially.
Potentially.
Okay.
Yeah. Meaning it's no longer what it was when they took the fish and squeezed the fish and got the oil out of it. And now it does have more byproducts that could, that the theory is that they're probably not great for you. So in summary, if your doctor's providing you with a prescription, continue taking that. If you are getting enough omega-3s from your diet, probably don't need a supplement. Probably Fatty15's a better supplement in that case. More clinically relevant benefits, doesn't have the risk of oxidation or going rancid, safer for your cells.
How did you guys get it to be not an oil? We were talking about omega-3 oils. Omega-3s, we all go to oil. How did C15 not become an oil?
We looked at a variety of ways to make C15 because there's so much science here. We wanted to come out with a product that was at that level of science. And so you'll see in our, in everything we do in our packaging, our bottle, everything is good for you and good for the earth, the highest level. And so when we looked at different ways to make it, we could have gotten an oil, we could have done fermentation, algae, things like that. But to create a basically 100% pure powder, the only way to do that was to use plant-based sources. So we basically use plants as a starting material. We add a carbon to it, and that gets you, 100% pure free fatty acid C15.
And where does the C15 come from?
Yeah. And so you start with plants. So generally nutmeg, some coconut, things like that. But that's C14. And so when we make it into C15, there's no allergens, there's no coconut, there's no nuts. You don't have to worry about, allergies to those things. So but
C15 isn't found naturally in nature or in the wild.
It is.
It's C14 and we have to make it?
Well, that's how we're doing it. But yes, C15 is found in, skin and heads of fish, in high-fat dairy products. But to make that pure in those products would take a very long time and would be very difficult. So this is a way we could create a, 100% pure, powder, non-oxidizing, bioavailable, it's a free fatty acid product that, is the highest bar. There's really no higher bar that you could do to make a product like this. And that's why we can use it for looking at, the disease-related treatment of this molecule C15, a food ingredient, and as a supplement. It's the same ingredient in there.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so it's good. I mean, we've won a lot of awards for the ingredient and the purity. When we came out with this, we won Nutri-Ingredients, I think it was Nutritional Outlets, Ingredient Producer of the Year, runner-up for the other big one. And so people have recognized this is like the top as far as creating an ingredient that is pure, sustainable, beneficial, and has a really long shelf life. So,
talk to me about why we should really care about this. In what ways am I going to feel C15 deficiency? Why should I consider looking for more of it in my diet or even consider supplementation? Also, what should I be looking at in my biomarkers as a key indicator that I might be C15 deficient?
Yeah. So when we started studying this on the, on the pharma side with the dolphins, we knew there'd be long-term benefits. Like if you get your CBC, your chemistry panel, you'll see if you're anemic, your anemia improves. In fact, that's one of the ways we've discovered this is when the dolphins who were on the lower end of like their hemoglobin hematocrit.
Can you define anemia for us, please,
and so the amount, like if you look at your red blood cells, you need enough ability in those red blood cells to carry oxygen appropriately. So when you're anemic, you have less oxygen carrying capacity, you get fatigued, that kind of thing. And there's all different types of anemia and things like that, but that's the summary. So we knew that based on all these studies, we knew CBC anemia would improve. We knew your liver function would improve. We looked at like cholesterol levels, that improved. Insulin resistance, that improved. And then, all these indices, we knew would be long-term benefits as people started taking these. But what we didn't know, and what the dolphins or cell systems couldn't tell us, is we have these near-term benefits as well. And part of it may be because of the endocannabinoid system. But when people take Fatty15, we survey people at 2 weeks and then 6 weeks. So at 2 weeks, 2/3 of people were having a near-term benefit. They were feeling better. They were sleeping better. They were snacking less between meals. And a lot of people's hair were thicker, skin was shinier, things like that. And that was amazing to understand. That
Yeah, I
was
don't think
amazing
anybody would turn
feedback.
down those effects.
I know, right?
Yeah.
And so if you look at the reviews on the site that people are adding, I mean, now there's like 3,000 reviews of people like saying, "Hey, I'm feeling this. My hair is thicker. I feel better," and things like that. And that was a very pleasant surprise because we didn't know that was the case. But it does suggest that one, people may be deficient in C15, and that fixing that deficiency improves their short-term health as well as long. And then it shows that maybe because this is a pure C15 free fatty acid, maybe there's additional benefits of having it in that form.
Oh, there has to be, I'm sure.
Right, because free fatty acid, for instance, is very bioavailable and goes, we know that that's easy for people to digest and to have its benefits, seen quickly. And so anyway, and then at 4 months, we noticed that 75% of people were having these near-term benefits, which was really interesting. And so we knew about the long-term benefits. We didn't know people would have these near-term benefits, which is great. And so you asked the second question, monitoring. So once you join the Fatty15 ecosystem, we send you a message that says, okay, time to go to your doctor, get these labs. CBC, chemistry, lipid panel, LFTs, what we discussed. And then 90 days later, we want you to go back and just see if there's a difference. And so that has been pretty successful with people going to their doctor, and their doctors are like, what's going on? What are you doing? And so you can monitor it with normal 5-year physicals like that. One of the things we're working on, and we will be announcing shortly, maybe this is the first time, is we've developed a C15 test. And
what does that look like?
So it's basically a spot test. We worked with a partner who does lab testing, and they will send you a kit, and you basically it's a blood spot. You get your C15 levels.
So it's just a biomarker test for C15.
Yeah, you can measure C15 levels. So the way physicians were monitoring C15 levels, and some of them, like Dr. Hyman, were doing this for a while, and so they would get a total like fatty acid panel, like all the fatty acids, which is great, but it gives you percent of. So what percent C15 is what percent of total, so it's not ideal. So we developed this test called the cell strength test that looks at C15 levels and a few other things to measure like how strong are your cells. And why that's important, and to backtrack, is we know that there's a theory called the pacemaker theory of aging, right? And so longer lived animals have sturdier cells. And so if you look at mice, worms, and flies, their cells turn over quickly and they're not as strong. If you look at blue whales, people, dolphins, they have stronger cells. And that is nature's way to make animals live longer. Just the way it is from the beginning of time, right?
Yeah.
And so if you look at the cell membranes of short-lived animals, they have higher PUFAs, higher omega-3s, less odd-chain saturated fatty acids. If you look at longer-lived animals, they have less PUFAs as a ratio and more odd-chain saturated fatty acids, stronger cells.
Man.
And so hence, that's why our test is called the cell strength test and looks at how strong your cells are. And so the last thing I'll say is, why we were seeing, it may be why we're seeing the results of anemia in the CBC, right? Because red blood cells turn over very quickly. And so if it's a canary in a coal mine situation, right? If they're turning over quickly, you'll get anemia. If you strengthen those cells, you won't. The red blood cells last longer. And so hence, CBC is a good way to monitor this as well as like a C15 test to look specifically what levels you have. And so as the nutritional deficiency story comes to light as well, a C15 level will let you know, are you above the threshold of what may be deficiency syndrome or not? And so all that data is coming out now. Clinical trial will be coming out soon. The test will be available soon. But that's where this is headed.
That's fascinating. That's really incredible. I'm so excited to follow along in those studies. And personally as well, like I said, now taking it myself for a while. And this year, I've shared with my audience, this year is the first year where I'm going to get labs every quarter. This year for me is it's going into optimal. I've been in great ranges for a lot of things, and I have a lot of healthy habits, things I've been doing for years. But right now I'm really trying to just go, all right, let me just see if I can dial in even a little bit more. And I was sharing with you ever since starting Fatty15 and another key Akkermansia probiotic supplement, I've been getting my metabolic health finally in ranges that I love. I've gotten below a 5.1 A1C for the first time ever. But another trendy word right now, I think a lot of people are latching onto, is mitochondria.
Yeah.
And I'm one of them. You know, I'm very interested in my mitochondrial health. I'm very interested in how we can stimulate the growth of more mitochondria and make the ones that we do have more efficient and just operate better. I want to ask you, why is mitochondrial health important, and what role does C15 play in our mitochondrial health?
The powerhouses of our cells.
Right, yeah. If anybody remembers from like middle school science class, you know, what does that actually mean, and why is mitochondrial health actually important, and the correlation between that and C15?
Our cells, our bodies need energy, and the way to do that is mitochondria produce ATP. I mean, that doesn't get simpler than that. So when our mitochondria are broken, they produce less energy, less ATP, less cellular energy.
And what breaks them?
So there's a variety of things, and I'm not a mitochondrial expert, but if you look at the pathways, how mitochondria makes energy, there's all these different like steps, phases, right? And if some of those phases are broken, then your mitochondria are not as efficient, right? And so when we studied C15, looking at mitochondria, it was actually a rescue function. So meaning there's these complexes that science has named for the pathways that make your mitochondria produce ATP. If one of those complexes goes down, that's a problem. C15 will bypass the first complex and put you back in the normal system. So that's what we found with C15, is it repaired and then bypassed the broken part of mitochondria. And so
why do you think that is? Why is that happening? How is that happening?
Yeah, there's something about odd chain like saturated fatty acids, and our body has used them and needed them since the beginning of time. It's our physiology, right? And so part of that is mitochondria. It's all cells. Like our cells need odd chain saturated fatty acids, including mitochondria. And so it's an area of further study. Like, I'm not a mitochondria expert, but it does seem like what we know now is if you take mitochondria that are broken and you give them C15, put them in a milieu of C15, the ATP production will ramp up and your mitochondria will be more efficient. And so
that's incredible.
Yeah, they actually we didn't do this. There was a group that looked at adding C15 to hair follicles.
What did that do?
And it ramped up ATP production by 350%. So, I mean, one study, and not done by us, but suggesting...
I'm just picturing a bunch of guys taking C15 and just pouring all over their hair follicles now.
I don't think there's
not
enough
a topical
data
agent
to support that yet, but maybe one time down the road, right? So, I mean, mitochondria is important. Muscle is important. You know, in our grand scheme of health, right? C15 is an important part of that. And we're finding out that if there's a deficiency syndrome associated with this will be like the first deficiency syndrome found since like vitamin C, pirates, and scurvy. I mean, this is going to be big.
Really, that level?
It's still that, you're right. But it's still one part of your whole health. Like, you need exercise, you need to eat right. This is not a cheat sheet for, just doing one thing and improving your health. It's got to be associated with, good practices as well.
I heard this amazing catchy term, zombie cells.
Yeah.
What are they? Why do we have them? And how do we get rid of them?
Yeah. So zombie cells. So if you look at, there's these like hallmarks of aging, right? So there's ways in which processes that have been studied over time that look like are responsible for how we age. Right. And so there's now 12, started out as I think it was like 3 at first. And all these hallmarks are things that science suggests that you can influence to influence aging. Right. It's things like, don't make me name them all because don't remember.
I'm sure you got a few.
It's like DNA, it's like epigenetics, like what happens to your DNA after time. It's like cell communication, mitochondrial dysfunction, things like that. And so one of those...
I'm sure metabolic health is in there.
Yeah. And these are like, metabolic health would be a bigger term and be encompassed in some of these hallmarks.
Okay.
And so, why I'm starting at this level is if you look at C15 and you look at longevity, we noticed that when we studied it against rapamycin, we noticed it was very similar, and rapamycin is the leading longevity agent. So right now, and so we started looking into, okay, what are the specific pathways? Like, what are the longevity pathways does C15 influence? And it influences almost all of them. So, which is great, right?
Very
because
great, yeah.
if you want to, the dolphins lived healthier longer. It may have been from something else outside of C15, but maybe C15 was an indicator. So then we were studying this in cell systems and through the hallmarks of aging, and it's just another, check in the box. Yes, it influences positively longevity pathways. It increases ATP, as we discussed. It inhibits mTOR. These are the normal longevity pathways. Not normal. These are the things that right now we suggest will help us age healthier. And so all these pathways are important, including zombie cells and, making cells turn over appropriately and not just become zombies and live forever.
What exactly is, sorry if I missed this, but exactly what is a zombie cell and what is happening when a cell kind of turns?
Yeah, okay. And so a couple things. One, surgeon background is not longevity.
Right, of course, yeah.
And so zombie cells are cells that should have been cleared by our body, but instead are just living and causing inflammation and things like that. And so we need those cells to be cleared out or just prevent them from being zombie cells. And so that's kind of the limit of my knowledge there. But one of the nice thing is C15 influences zombie cells as well.
Influences our body, clearing them out?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. And so again, there's all these nuances to longevity pathways, but in general, all the science around longevity pathways, all the science around zombie cells, things like that, are important parts. But yet there's something larger, right? We need those pathways, those cells, to result in preventing disease, being healthier for longer, and longevity. So as we look broader, if a molecule like C15, like rapamycin, can help prevent, diseases of aging, then they have a good chance of helping us live longer. So you see it at the biochemical level with the hallmarks of aging and things like that. You see it at the disease-related level, and those things together are probably what's going to make some big discoveries pretty soon in longevity and healthy aging.
Big discoveries in longevity. I feel like we have quite a few of those happening now. Yeah. Longevity, health span, lifespan have been, at least in the health and wellness world, have been really popular. And I had a guest on a couple months ago, Dr. Charles Brenner, and talking about, you familiar?
Yeah, a little, yeah.
Yeah, great guy. Yeah. Excuse me. Oh, yeah, I lost my train of thought. But talking about longevity in terms of, do we have the science right? Or is this just something that we think works now just because we have a little bit of science around it? And the example that came up was resveratrol. And looking at this highly concentrated polyphenol that we're getting from grapes and certain other foods about 10, 15 years ago-ish.
Was the rage.
It was all the rage. And it was, this is going to dramatically decrease, or decrease aging, increase longevity, increase health span, lifespan. It was like a godsend to the anti-aging community. And now it's kind of actually doesn't really do any of that stuff. Yeah. It's not a bad thing to have in the diet, but it's not this godsend we all thought it was. How do we know that something like this isn't going to happen with C15?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to longevity, I feel like we get very attached and very excited to these things, and then we don't have enough timeline to really kind of prove it.
Right. To your point, it's hard because if you did a randomized clinical trial from people when they were born to when they died and did enough, you'd probably find some good results, but you can't do that. And then how would you control for their diet and control for everything? And so that is where, to your point, that is where a model like the Dolphin comes in really handy, right? Because they did that, right? They started taking labs from them since they were born, and there's now 3 or 4 generations. They went to their doctor every month.
And what's a generation in a dolphin? Is it 20 years, 50 years?
Right. In general, in the wild, they live 20 years. At the Navy, they're living up to 50, a little older as well. So a lot longer, right?
Yeah.
So, but the Navy had the foresight to take labs and store them over time. So, when we're sick, we go to the doctor and they take labs. That's not what they did with dolphins. They did it at periods of time. And part of the reason is because dolphins couldn't tell you that they were feeling well or not. Yeah. But it provided that model to really understand like aging, right? And that's why this is so incredible, in that you have a long-lived mammal eating the same thing in the same environment, 3 generations, and you can see over time what happened to their metabolome, what happened to their, all these potential early stage diseases, things like that. And so it is a cheat sheet to understanding longevity. And so to your point, hard to do, hard to study.
Right.
So you need to find these factors that you can study, hence hallmarks of aging, hence cell systems, things like that. And so the dolphin allows you to bypass that a little bit. But long story short, like I said before, it's still about improving your health span, how long you live healthy, and potentially improving your lifespan, your total amount of life lived, right? And how you do that, prevent chronic diseases. And so any of these molecules need to work at that level. Yes, cell systems are super important. Understanding, pathways and hallmarks of aging and how they affect those, super important. It is also important to prevent chronic disease and allow you to live healthier for longer. But still, I think, there's a lot of data and a lot of new science coming out that tries to answer that question of like how you can study longevity. And so one of the ways that is an interesting story, one of our co-founders is Nick Shork, who's one of the leaders in the world in aging, right? He leads up the NIH's Longevity Consortium. And so when we were talking a long time ago, and he said, you have this data over 60 years, you could probably do something that no one else in the world could do. You could probably get aging rates. And so meaning like how fast someone is aging. If you take me and 2 me's exactly the same, one of me would age faster and one would age slower, just common things being common. What are the differences if you control for everything? And because the dolphins were so well controlled, they basically, Steph and Nick went back in 2 weeks, they published the study, finished the study that was then published that looked at aging rates. Like what biomarkers predicted healthy aging and not healthy aging.
What were they?
So there's a few, but in the biggest one was red blood cell width distribution. So how big your red blood cells were, how well your red blood cells were functioning was an indicator of the healthiest agers.
And let me guess, C15 can contribute to that?
Yeah. And so, that's how we found it, right? Because really 2 things. Some dolphins were getting metabolic syndrome, some weren't. Some were having anemia and not. And this
you looked
C15,
at the red blood cell and kind of go, why?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so interesting. So that was published, and there's other factors too, but it means that there are biomarkers that are easily attainable just through labs that can help us figure out aging rates. And that was in dolphins, but what we're seeing is the pathophysiology is so similar to these diseases. Probably the same thing in humans as well. And that has been a biomarker that people have used in the past as well.
And, speaking of, like I mentioned earlier, this year I'm getting quarterly labs. I'm really looking at optimization. And the way that labs have progressed over the last few years in terms of ease of access and reduction of costs, I think is incredible. We no longer need, there's a time and a place for your doctor, but we no longer need to wait until we're sick or wait for that annual physical to go get labs. If we're curious, if we want to know what's going on right here, right now, because of the things I'm doing, not doing, eating, not eating. And getting quantitative data, I think a lot of people are becoming more hip to, and they're able to do it more easily. And so I want to ask you, is this something that we should really only consider after getting labs and going, oh, my C15 levels are not in an optimal range, are low, and then I should really look at ramping up in my diet or consider supplementation? Or is this something, regardless of what the data shows us, by incorporating more of in our diet through food or through supplementation, it's going to have beneficial effects? Yeah.
So let me answer the second one. Then let's talk about labs for a minute. So C15 has near-term and long-term benefits. So the near term, you feel better, all the sleep better, all that kind of stuff. So those are important things you get just from taking C15 as a free fatty acid, right? Regardless of levels and things like that. So if you look at monitoring levels over time, the more and more literature is suggesting there is a deficiency syndrome associated with that, and you need to maintain a level that is a certain point. So when you monitor, you measure C15 levels, you're going to see, are you deficient or not? So two things, take C15 as a free fatty acid in this form, you'll feel better, or at least 2/3 of people at 2 weeks, 3/4 of people at 4 weeks.
Those are incredible numbers.
Yeah, no, it's really good. And it does show that it's interesting. Once people start taking Fatty 15, we have a 95% retention a month, which is unheard of, right? They stay because they're feeling better.
It's clearly
their doctor
working, yeah.
is saying, hey, what are you doing? You should continue doing that. So that's incredible. And so, yes, from a monitoring standpoint, it would be good to understand if you're deficient. And then it would be good to, get above that level, and hence the reason we created the test. Also, with regards to labs, like monitoring changes in CBC, chemistry, lipid panel, LFTs are important, because it's just that, okay, we got our C15 levels up, and did that affect those other systems positively? Did my low hematocrit hemoglobin get better? Did my LFTs go down? So twofold, it's important. But labs in general. So, I'm at Navy and Marine Corps aviation for a long time. You have to get labs every year. And so it really is interesting, because it provides, been in 27 years. So I have 27 years of data that I can monitor, like what's happened to my CBC over time, what's happened to my cholesterol over time. And
I would love to nerd out over that. That's incredible.
And so there's those type of labs that I think is really important. Then there's continuous monitoring. And I don't know yet that we have enough knowledge to really make use of those things. Like in certain disease states, of course, you've got to measure glucose levels.
Right, like a CGM, continuous glucose monitor, can kind of get that real-time feedback to really make a choice.
Exactly. And if you have a disease state, diabetes type 1, things like that, you have to. But if you're doing it for monitoring your health, like what do you do with that information? We don't know exactly. Okay, I ate breakfast and now my glucose spiked to this level.
I totally agree with that. And I just want to interject and say, I'm so glad to hear someone like yourself, a medical professional, say that, because as someone who I do see really great value in CGMs, especially if you're pre-diabetic, diabetic, or have, other glucose intolerance, metabolic health issues. But as someone who is just interested in just getting that snapshot, I've done it. I've done it many, many times over the last couple of years. And even with my expertise and background, I too struggled with, what do I really do with this? And seeing a spike is not necessarily a bad thing. That's what our bodies are supposed to do. Now, yes, of course, spike after spike after spike after spike turns into most likely issues that we really need to focus on. But it's kind of like, do we have access to too much data, too many data points, too many biomarkers if we don't have a clinical reason for it?
Yeah, I think that we'll get there. But I think at this point, the technology may be going faster than the science to make use of those things.
I was able to bring in some past data points in when I was getting more exhaustive and comprehensive labs. Specifically, like, we were looking at, like, I think it was CRP, or kind of looking at some other unique biomarkers that the physician was like, I could maybe advise you if I knew more data about your metabolic health at the time, if I knew your glucose or A1C. And actually, wait. So I went back to that day or that week, and I go, my A1C was this, my glucose was this. So then it did help my physician kind of paint a more specific picture with these other biomarkers. So having it kind of help put all the dots together, not necessarily as, islands independently. Yeah,
it's interesting. I mean, there's so many factors, right? So is it environment? Is it, your genes? Is it something like that? I did a N of 1 trial on myself, right? And so
I'm sure a lot. I'm sure you do those a lot.
Maybe not as much as others, but and so I had to be on Lipitor, a statin, for a while, because my family's always had hypercholesterolemia, high cholesterol, high LDL. And so I was on a low dose, and I was getting myalgias, which are, the leg pains and things like that. And so I knew I was deploying. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to get off this medication. And, when you deploy, you're like, you work out a lot, you eat better, things like that, or at least you have the option to. And so I went into full workout mode along with other things I had to do. And so ate right, exercised a whole bunch, and I was able to normalize everything in 7 months. Like,
wow.
I mean, so for
it's-
me, even though I had it in my genes of high cholesterol, high LDL, hypertension, metabolic syndrome, that kind
You
of
can
thing.
manipulate it.
You can, but I know now that if I want to normalize all my labs, I have to maintain that level of fitness. Whew, I don't have time for that right now. And so I wish, but so it was good. This is just an N of one, but for me, even with a genetic predisposition to, high cholesterol and things like that, I was able to normalize it with diet and exercise. It's interesting.
Crazy thought, diet and exercise moves the needle.
Yeah.
I want to ask another question before I get into my final question as we begin to wrap up. When I think of omega-3s and a lot of the research I've seen over the years, we're really finding that we always kind of knew it helped with brain health and function. It will cross the blood-brain barrier. And of course, when we're looking at the cellular level, like it improves every cell at every level. And so better cells, better brain health. But can you talk to us specifically now about C15 and brain health, C15 and cognition and cognitive function?
Yeah. This is something that we learned pretty recently, right? It really goes back to PDC, that molecule. Because people were feeling better, they were getting, mood was better, snacking less between meals, sleeping better. Really started looking into it. Why? Like, what is it affecting, above, through the blood-brain barrier on the other side of that, that was beneficial? So hence, the metabolite of PDC really helped us answer that. Like, okay, C15 and this metabolite, what happens after you eat C15? Goes across the blood-brain barrier and activates, the endocannabinoid system. And that, to our understanding now, seems like the reason that people are having these mind, related.
Because of the activation of the endocannabinoid system, am I hearing you correctly?
Right. And so that's part of it. But additionally, there's something called phenotypic screening. So if you take different molecules, you can compare them to other molecules that already exist, whether they're supplements, most of the time they're pharmaceuticals, things like that. And these tests will show you your molecule, C15, what is it most like? What class of medications that exists out there is it most like? If you look at C15, you run it through this screening, it's very similar to bupropion, Wellbutrin, in the sense that it activates similar cell systems and things like that. And so that could be another reason odd chain saturated fatty acids potentially make you feel better, at least what we're seeing now with the endocannabinoid and with this similarity to Wellbutrin, which is a safe, some people use it for antidepressant, for smoking censation and things like that. So that could answer some of the reason why that's happening as well, but it's something we still need to look into more.
And what about timing? I've also heard a lot of, modification around recommendations for ingesting omega-3s. Not so much in diet, because the closer we get to bedtime, the more we eat can have a negative effect on sleep, and we don't metabolize as well. We don't get as much nutrient absorption. But if we choose to supplement, when people are taking fish oil omega-3s, I've seen a lot of recommendations come out and say the closer to bedtime, 30 minutes to an hour maybe, so that it actually is getting into the brain when you're going through all these cycles of sleep. Is the same true for C15? Is it like a timing thing, maybe more optimal there?
I think we have had a lot of customers suggest that most customers are taking it in the morning. And because it's what's in the capsule is 100% pure C15, you can literally just open the capsule and put it in your coffee or tea or, put it on anything. It's a really good ingredient. So most of the people do that, and then they still get benefits of the sleep. We do have some people who take it at night because they feel like it improves their sleep, which is great. One of the good things about having a free fatty acid and that's so bioavailable is you don't have to take it with food. So it's not like you have to eat a whole bunch of other food to help digest your supplement, C15.
Which is true with most other essential vitamins and minerals that we need. We need it, they're mostly fat soluble, so we got to take it with food.
Right. You need to increase that bioavailable bioabsorption. And so, I think with C15, what we're finding at this point is you can control your benefits. If the major benefit you're getting is sleep, try it in the night, before you go to sleep, like an hour before. If it's other, then, try it in the daytime. If it's more, mood regulation, less snacking, less eating between meals, that kind of stuff, then maybe it's in the morning.
I think I'm going to try moving it to night. There are a couple supplements that I take at nighttime, particularly magnesium being one of them.
Yeah.
And I want to take it with that. And maybe I'll run through a cycle of just C15. I'll ditch the magnesium. I'll take it in the day and really kind of see. Because sleep for me has always been my biggest priority. I try to focus on in my personal wellness hierarchy. I'm always trying to maintain at least, but also optimize my sleep in terms of how I feel. But, I measure using a Whoop device here, looking at my sleep cycles. So now I'm very curious. I'm going to try. I'm going to start taking my C15 at night and see if I can get even more dialed in sleep.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a nice thing. You can, it's so easy to take. It's 100 milligrams. It's pure powder.
I didn't even hit on
smell,
that. That's another
taste.
thing. So many people, you don't get enough in because it's to get the recommended doses, unless you're getting a high dose, pure potency prescription, you got to take 3, 4, 5, 6 fish oil supplements. They're usually pretty big, or omega-3 supplements. This is, you guys are looking at the video.
Tiny.
It's just, you take one capsule, it's tiny.
Yeah.
Which is also, shout out, because thanks to this dosage, I finally got my wife to take this. She hates taking supplements and capsules. And it was mostly because it was the quantity.
Yeah.
But with this, she's a family nurse practitioner.
That's
so
great.
she loves the science behind it.
Great.
And she's like, now I can actually take it because it's just one capsule.
Yeah, yeah, it does help. And, one of the nice things is that this molecule goes through encapsulation machinery, really easily. And so it doesn't need a filler. So if you look at most supplements, they've got other stuff in there. They've got flour, they've got something. So the capsule looks full. This is a small size 2 capsule. And if you shake it, if you really shake it down, it's going to be not completely full, the capsule, but that's okay. It's 100% pure C15, no filler, no nothing. And we had a question, okay, if we're going to put this out in capsule form, are people ever going to say, hey, it's not totally full? And so we said, well, it's better for them to know this is it in there. It's 100 milligrams. Yeah. There's no filler. There's no nothing. And there may be a little space on the end, and that's okay.
Right.
Because we don't want to add anything else. We don't want to add, flour or something that just makes it look full. This is what you get. 100% pure C15 in there.
Well, Eric, I just want to say, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. I love what you all are doing over at Fatty15 and kind of bringing just this really unique approach and discovery in the scientific world and the natural world to our world. And I've been loving taking Fatty15 now, going on, I think, month 4.
Great.
Maybe going into month 5. I got to do my math. And just, I love how easy it is. I love the fact that my wife is on board with it. So now my family unit is getting healthier. And just honestly, I also stay on you guys' email because the newsletters you put out are so informative and so up to date. Yeah. You're sharing all of the research, all of the new science coming to light, not only just what you all are doing. And so I think you're really, maybe pun intended here, bringing the whole tide in on just incredible new data and applications in very, very simple ways.
Yeah, we started this movement of understanding this molecule and its benefits, and now the world is catching on. And so there's so much science coming out, which is for us really exciting, because our goal, Fatty15 is really good. It's helping people, which is great, but ultimately we need to replace C15. We need to put it back in our diet. So ultimately we see this as, being in foods and other things, just to provide C15 levels of a similar nature that we used to get before we changed our, the ways cows are fed and,
of course,
different foods that we get now.
There's just one part of a much bigger broken system.
Yeah.
But, this gives me so many ideas, kind of hearing that you can, pop it open, put it in drinks or coffee. I see this, especially here in LA, we have a lot of like mocktail bars and mocktail drink options. Maybe we can get a C15, a Fatty15 mocktail, like a little topper or something.
Yeah, a little shaker.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Which is a whole nother conversation around, like with my wife, of I feel like there are a lot of things that people want to do to better their health, but just for whatever reason, there's a barrier to entry. And that could be dose, that could be cost, that could be access, that could just be I don't like this delivery method, I prefer that one, and it doesn't get there. So finding unique ways for that delivery to happen is, I think, a part of the work. Besides doing your due diligence and looking at companies and your own labs of what actually works and what you need. There's a whole nother aspect of that.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we end all of our team calls with one saying, save the dolphins, save the world. So I figured needed to put that in there.
I feel like there's like a Flipper reboot here waiting to happen with C15.
That's funny.
I'm sure you've never heard that joke either. My last question
Yeah.
is kind of to bring it back to the theme of the show, which actually you'll appreciate being a military guy, ever forward. It was a phrase my family grew up with from my dad. He was with the 101st Airborne for a while, but before that,
Interesting.
he was National Guard out of the 116th Infantry Regiment, my hometown back in Roanoke, Virginia. And our unit, his unit insignia was ever forward.
Yeah. Oh,
so he picked it up
interesting.
from
Makes
the
sense
military.
now, yeah.
There we go. Yeah.
Right.
So from the military to my dad, to my family, to here now, kind of my interpretation of it is, you know, how do we take note of these things in life that not only can help maintain our physical and mental resilience, but how can we use them and apply them in our own life in our own ways to learn how to move forward? Yeah. So every guest I ask at the end, ever forward, what does that mean to you, those two words? How would you define it?
Yeah, I mean, I love it. The reason for that, I think it means just keep learning, keep pushing the envelope. And so I think from the military side of things, I think the military actually does a great job at promoting that, meaning, you know, you're a young person and you're put in these environments where you need to succeed and there's really no option not to. And so talking about, you know, building people and minds who are ever forward and who are really entrepreneurs, it's a great environment for that. Because like, for instance, a technology you're using in, you know, a wartime situation or something like that has to work. If it doesn't, it's not, you know, it's just, you get rid of it. And so it's like that, you know, it has to work or you have to figure out a way to do it. So ever forward, continue to crush it and just, you know, maintain the constant learning and application of those learnings into improving yourself and your environment around you.
Well, I love that interpretation. I always say there's never a right or a wrong answer. There's just yours, so I appreciate that. And anytime I have a military guest on, I feel like it just kind of, it hits a little bit different as well, kind of knowing that that's really the origin. But truly, my goal with every episode is for the listener to walk away with something that they can, you know, maintain. Like, yes, this is what I'm doing and it's working, and, you know, I've got the science or the anecdotal evidence to kind of show it, but also how can they extract something out of it to, like, let me try this. Let me be a new N=1 today with just one area of my well-being. Right.
Well, it's a hot topic. N of 1 studies for another time.
Yeah, that gives me some ideas for sure. N=1, it could be a slippery slope for a lot of people. Once we have, like I said earlier, access to a lot of great things, but then it's almost like, does everyone need that much information? Is everyone well-versed enough to actually take that and apply it in a healthy way?
So many things we could talk about here for the next time, but this gets into the biohacking field and, you know, what people are trying to do I love biohacking in the sense that people are trying to understand their physiology and physiology in a whole to improve health and their health. I love that idea. Well, for another time.
Application's a whole nother story.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.